So, as a young Earth creationist, one of the biggest challenges I think that we face, or at least that I have faced, is being extremely misunderstood and sometimes even unhelpfully uh, psychoanalyzed, right, by those who sort of disagree with my conclusions. And to be completely and entirely fair, this is a two-way street, right? This happens from both sides, right? This happens from young Earth creationists to others, and from others to young Earth creationists. And unfortunately, only one of them really ever gets talked about in the public arena. But I saw a Facebook post yesterday from someone who we're acquaintances. We've talked once or twice, and he's a good guy. Good brother in Christ. He is, I believe, a biology teacher, and I love him. I love him, but I was a little puzzled by something that he said, and some of the reactions to it from both sides. Again, were very, very interesting. So we're not going to break down his quote. We're not going to psychoanalyze him. Excuse me. Um, as a matter of fact, I'm not even going to tell you who it is. I'm not going to tell you who said the quote. I don't think that would be particularly helpful. But we are going to look at the response that one creation scientist did go ahead and give to this post. And I think that that will be something that helps us out as we look at this issue. Taking a little break from the normal content that we do on the podcast. Normally, we're going through the book of John, and December actually has been a really, really rough month. Our family did have COVID-19, at least a few of us did, and it was tough, man. It was really tough getting over it, and I mean, it's real, right? I mean, what more can I say? It's real, and fortunately, from what I'm hearing, I had a pretty mild case of it, and so did my mom. My mom had it; she had a fairly mild case of it, although she has breathing issues and such. So it was a little tough for her, even though it was a milder case. My wife had it and it was a little tough, but um, God's good. He was good through it, and we got to spend some extra time together in quarantine. So perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. But it's been a slow December in terms of the podcast. I haven't really gotten anything else out there lately, and so that is part of the reason why. So I am excited to bring this to you today. I did want to mention, so today is the very last day of December, and it is also the very last day that the sale will be running for the Bible Nerd Society. Now, the Bible Nerd Society is a group of passionate Bible nerds like you and like me. And what they do is we come together and have a discussion around certain issues. If you have a question that maybe goes beyond what we can normally cover through an email or something like that, then we go into deep discussion there. Also, when you join the Bible Nerd Society, you also get access to pretty much every piece of digital content that our ministry has ever produced. That's ebooks, that's audiobooks, audio courses, video courses, and a lot of other things as well, including even some new material on books that are being worked on. So I would highly encourage you to go over there if you want to. Today is the very last day that you can get in for 50% off, and you can join that just by going to www.biblenerdsociety.com or just biblenerdsociety.com. Either one of those should work. So right now you can get in for just $15 a year or $250 a month. So it's a pretty sweet deal. I would love for you to join me over there. No pressure. If you're not into that, you don't think that would be beneficial to you or helpful to you, don't worry about it. But if it's something where you find the content here helpful and you think that you would like to support us and also interact in a little bit deeper way, I would love to have you over there at BibleNerdSociety.com. All right, so let's kind of jump into what I want to talk about. And so there was a post that was put on Facebook a few days ago, again by a Christian biologist who he teaches here in the States. And I'm not even going to mention his name. I'm trying to be as vague as I can, just because, we're not in this to, attack people or to, like, my personal calling certainly is not to deal with, to call out specific people in the church that I don't agree with, or that they said something that I think is out of line. that's not my job. That's not my calling. Certainly, it is an important thing. But for me, I just really want to deal with the ideas. And so I'm going to try to just not even paraphrase, but just accurately, to the best of my ability, accurately and contextually summarize what he said so that we can think about what he said carefully and critically, and we'll go from there. So essentially, his point was this: when you are looking at the Bible, okay, and you're trying to determine which views are right among a sea of possible views, what you have to do is determine which of those views, or at least one thing you have to do, is determine which of those views is that the evidence for Christianity as a whole is sufficient to bear it. And essentially, in the post, he said that in his opinion, the evidence is not sufficient to bear a young Earth interpretation of the Bible. Now, it could be sufficient to bear certain old Earth interpretations of the Bible, according to him, but it would not work for any young Earth interpretations of the Bible. In other words, the evidence as a whole surrounding Christianity for the ultimate truth of the Christian worldview, if it has to include a young Earth creationist view of the world, then that would be disastrous for Christianity. Is his point. So what he says is that, well, so if one compels, if the Bible compels you to take the young Earth view, that you're convinced, in other words, that the Bible really truly is teaching a young Earth view, then in his opinion, it would be preferable, okay, to arrive at the conclusion that the Bible was in error on that point, rather than to try to include that as a part of one's Christian worldview. Now, there's a lot of context that goes beyond that he said. The general point of the added context is simply just that it's a big decision to say something like that. That's obviously a huge claim, right? To say that if you're compelled by this view, then it would be preferable to say that the Bible is in error versus anything else, or versus that it should be included as part of this worldview, right? So he recognizes the gravity of that claim. He says that alternative interpretations should be sought before arriving at such a conclusion, but that if one were to arrive at such a conclusion, then the work would have to be done to go in and make sense of this and see what implications that has for inerrancy, for inspiration, and all of those things. Okay. Now, there's a few things going on that are themes, unfortunately, that creationists see often, that are kind of embedded in that post. And so I want to kind of run through some of those themes. I want to give you a quote from a creation scientist who responded to this post, and then we'll wrap up for today. So one of the things that comes up is this whole idea of general revelation versus special revelation. Now, this has been a big thing, right, in the kind of creation conversation for a long time. There's a almost implicit assumption that what we see in general revelation should be equated to the science of modern discovery. Okay. So modern science and general revelation sort of being conflated together. But it's really important to take special note of the distinction there. And perhaps if pressed or in a conversation with me, maybe this person would have gone ahead and made this distinction and clarified how he meant the distinction. But just expressing how it came across to me in the post that I read, it looked like there was this implicit assumption that we have to deal. Yes, we have special revelation, but God gave us two forms of revelation. And so we have to deal with general revelation as well. And the implicit assumption throughout the post, if you were to read it, is that general revelation pretty much, lines up with certain claims of modern science. Now, this person and this is actually part of the irony, and we're going to see this in a minute when we get to the quote from the scientist who responded to him. This person, ironically, is involved in the intelligent design movement. In other words, he, at least at this juncture, at this stage, he denies that macroevolution in the neo-Darwinian sense is something that has taken place. He is in the intelligent design camp. And so obviously, he is willing to be skeptical of certain claims of modern science. And yet, when it comes to the issue of age, this is something that is not considered. Okay, it's almost just taken as a given, right? There's absolutely no way, right, that we can see the information any other way when we're looking at modern science. Like for some, and as it relates to the age of the Earth, like for some reason we couldn't take that data any other way. In fact, it's to such a degree that he claims that it would be preferable, because Christianity couldn't bear the weight of such a burden. It would be preferable to say that if that's really what the Bible teaches, then we would be better off to say that the Bible is in error on that point, right? And this whole fundamental issue is the difference between general revelation and special revelation, how they relate to one another. It's very important to understand that nowhere, as we read the Bible, nowhere does the Bible make any sort of claim that would even suggest that we tie what we learn from general revelation to the type of inquiry that we do when we're doing science. Okay. For in other words, maybe we could say something like, okay, well, in general revelation, we understand that a universe is here, right? But general revelation is not necessarily going to tell us about how the universe got here, right? We need special revelation for that, right? There's no claim in the Bible that would suggest that we should be looking for something like a big bang. Now, I realize that's going to sound controversial to people, because it sure does sound nice to say that, the Bible teaches creation ex nihilo. The Big Bang gives us a generally accepted scientific model that shows a universe basically miraculously coming out of nothing, and we go on from there, right? And so immediately that sort of looks or sounds like a Big Bang. One popular apologist even quips that and he's making arguments from a cosmological nature. He says that every Big Bang needs a Big Banger, right? And so obviously his point is that the Big Banger is God. And so it's like, that's really compelling. I want to be able to say that. But for the life of me, nothing I read in the Bible suggests to me at all that we're going to get clues as to the mechanism of creation in nature that would be such that it's a part of God's revelation to us. Humans come up with scientific models. Scientific models are often flawed. They just are. They're not perfect. They need tweaking. I mean, look at all of the things of days gone by that was the generally accepted view of science that today we look at as absolutely absurd. I mean, a geocentric view of the universe pretty much reigned supreme for what, 15 centuries? Something like that. It's just insane. And yet we know today that view is ludicrous. So how dare we, right? How dare we take what we learn from modern science and sort of shoehorn our biblical data around what we're learning from modern science. In fact, I would argue this is the entire error that was committed by the church when those who were wanting to hold on to that geocentric model of the universe, and pushing against Galileo, I would argue that this is what they were guilty of, right? That they were trying to shoehorn their biblical interpretation, and use that as a way to deny the science of the day. Okay, but understanding that we've learned a lot since then about science. We've learned a lot about the Bible since then. And we know that the error is often completely opposite of what those who talk about this and teach about this um, like to say. The issue has always been trying to shoehorn an interpretation that we have from our modern scientific understanding into the Bible. That's always been the problem. It was the problem back then, and I believe it is the problem now. Okay, so if a young earth interpretation does compel you and you're persuaded that's what the Bible teaches, should you really? Should your first, um, you know, path of moving forward with that be to defer to modern science and reinterpret the Bible? That sounds like a mistaken course to me. Sounds like a mistaken course. Now, another thing that I want to kind of highlight here is this. The problem is not science versus the Bible. It's very tempting, okay, when you're getting into these kind of conversations, it is very, very tempting to make this the issue. To make the issue, well, science says this, the Bible says this, and so which one are we going to choose? In fact, when I was typing out this very bullet point for you there, what I initially started typing out sounded horrible because it sounded like it was buying into this dichotomy. It's really, really easy to buy into this dichotomy. Note that nobody in the creationist camp, well, I mean, maybe some are, but like certainly your mainstream creationists are not arguing that what we have here is a case of science versus the Bible. Science says this, the Bible says that, therefore we're going to take the Bible first over science. That is not the claim. That is not the issue. That is not what's going on here. Okay. The issue is the interpretation of data. That's the problem. The interpretation of data. It's a two-way street, right? Data has to be interpreted in the Bible. Data also has to be interpreted in nature, right? So we do have to interpret both special revelation and general revelation. I would argue that there are differences in the kind of interpretation that you have to do, right? When you're interpreting the Bible, you're interpreting essentially propositional statements. When you're interpreting nature, you have propositional statements that are formed by scientists who come up with a conclusion as they're using other methodologies to interpret data from the physical world. And depending on what they're looking at, the assumptions they have to use, etc., what goes into that may not be as cut and dry as sometimes it's made to seem. And so it's very important, and this is maybe just an admonition for fellow creationists, and also just kind of a PSA to those who are critics of the young age creationist position, that we don't think the problem is science versus the Bible. We think the problem is the interpretation of data, and what we're willing to do as a creationist is question the data of modern science as it relates to methodologies that allow one to arrive at an age for the earth. Now, honestly, this is not, and I've held this opinion for some time, this is not too far of a cry from those who are skeptical of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, of those who are skeptical of evolution. And this has always puzzled me why it's foolish, so to speak, to believe in a young age for the earth, right? But it's not foolish to deny evolution and hold to the intelligent design model. I think that if you were to get any certainly evolutionary biologist in a room who is no reason to give the Bible any sort of meaningful place in their understanding of Earth history and life history, for that matter, universal history. If you were to ask that person if the evolutionary evidence was as good as the evidence for something like the Big Bang, I think they would say yes. Now, I mean, I've never asked somebody this question. Perhaps I should, but given the way they talk, certainly, I don't think that people who hold to the neo-Darwinian synthesis would be willing to admit that their view has less evidence than something even like the Big Bang, or that radiometric dating can provide an accurate date for the age of the Earth. I truly believe that these people think that evolution is such a settled science that they would place the interpretations of one of those pieces of data on par with the other. And so my question then, becomes the same question that ultimately we're getting ready to look at here in just a minute from Paul, and that is, why not be skeptical of the other? So let's just go ahead and bring that in, and we'll take a look at that quote real quick. So this was a creation scientist, Paul Garner. He is a geologist and really great guy. He's written a book called The New Creationism that I highly, highly recommend. It's a great book to check out. I've had his colleague on the podcast before, Stephen Lloyd. Stephen Lloyd's an excellent theologian and also has a background in the sciences. And really recommend their work. They're from the Biblical Creation Trust, I believe it's called, over there in the UK, and they're doing great work. And so this was the response that came, and I'm going to read it here, and we're going to talk about this. So here's what Paul said in response to this person. It seems to me that your interpretive choices regarding the Bible's teaching on origins, and not just in Genesis, are being driven by your a priori belief that the evidence for an ancient earth, and in fact, more to the point, the evidence for ancient life and death, cannot, even in principle, be interpreted in other ways. But given that you're not an earth scientist and therefore not in the best position to evaluate the relevant data, I'm puzzled as to why you're so willing to defer to the scientific consensus on this question when you're evidently willing to resist the consensus within your own discipline, e.g., your support for ID. Wouldn't agnosticism on your part concerning age questions be more appropriate? For my own part, as an earth scientist, I've seen young age research bear fruit time and again, even turning seemingly insuperable old age arguments into young age arguments. I can give many examples. That's not to say there aren't challenges or data that looks hard to explain, but I really don't see the quality of evidence favoring an old age as any better or worse than the quality of evidence favoring common descent and neo-Darwinianism. Close quote. Now, again, that quote was from Paul Garner, the writer of The New Creationism and also a geologist and earth scientist. And I think the point he's making here is just absolutely huge. The issue is, can the data be interpreted a different way? Is that even in principle possible? And should somebody, and this is a really great question that I think that is super important to reflect upon. Okay. Should somebody who is not trained in that field of science, you have to realize specialization is a huge thing. You're going to have people who are scientists but have no clue about the assumptions and the conclusions even of another branch of scientists, even of science, even if they have like a PhD. Specialization is a big problem. And so like, even thinking about that, like, what if you're not even a scientist at all? Should one's conclusion really be that the best path is to think that the Bible is teaching error on a particular point versus just agnosticism on the question because of a lack of information? When you have somebody who is qualified to speak to the quality of information, and I didn't copy this in, but there's actually in a post further down in response, he kind of adds it as a PS. He gives about 8 to 10 examples. I can't remember. I think it might be 8 examples of different areas where the young age evidence has in fact bore fruit over and against one of these insuperable arguments. And so when you have someone who is an expert in the field and they say, well, there does appear to be this fruitfulness of research, and realizing that science, whether it be a young age creationist or an old age creationist or a secularist, it doesn't really matter. Science is always going to have issues. Models are always going to have issues, again, because they're made by flawed human beings. And so the question really quickly becomes, is it really the best path to just defer to the consensus in that area and throw up your hands and say, oh, it must be right, and then take the Bible as being an error, versus just coming to a position of agnosticism on that point? So I guess really that is my question for you to really consider. Like, when you're looking at this issue, where do you land? I mean, if do you really think that the best thing to do is is to submit that the Bible is teaching error. If you come to this view, I would think not. Where do you land on the issue of the evidence being as favorable for an old age interpretation of Earth history as it is for or against Darwinian evolution? I really think those are questions that need to be considered if you are listening or watching as someone who does accept the old age creationist position, and you would agree with the statement that that the young Earth position is unable to be borne by the full evidence and the full weight of the evidence for Christianity. So think about that a little bit, and I want to thank you just for joining me here. I know this has been the first time that I've come on and podcasted since the very beginning of the month. And again, it has been a little bit of a crazy month, but I hope that you had a wonderful Christmas. I hope that you have a wonderful New Year. Just along with the rest of you, I'm excited to see what 2021 has to offer. Don't forget that today is the very last day, if you're seeing or hearing this, to join the Bible Nerd Society for 50% off. You get it for $15 a year or for $2.50 per month. And what we're doing over there, see if I can go ahead and just share this with you if you are watching live. By the way, if you don't know, this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Bible Nerd TV. And so if I were to go right here, so right here, let's see, let me get this on the screen so that you can see it. Yeah, right there is the Bible Nerd Society. And so that you can see there are some question threads that we have going on right there. And in here is where you can get access to all of the information, all of the things that we allow you to download, all the digital content that we've ever created. Again, you get that all for that one monthly price or that one annual price. So it's really low right now. So I would highly encourage you to jump on that for 50% off. Again, today's the very last day, so I hope you jump over there. If not, it's all good. I'm just excited to have you as a member of my community, and super excited to nerd out about the Bible with you. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you in the next one.